This video is brought to you by Audible. Audible, get your audiobooks on. Use the link provided for a free trial. It helps us keep the show going.
計算上はアルティメットの破壊力が三原神に勝るはずだったのですが。
And yet you can't let him win what's legitimately against a town without invoking Deus Ex Machina. Can you, franchise?
Ask you say what you want. Ask you say what you want. Ask you say what you want. Love fire.
Everybody hates this movie. Everybody hates this movie. While I am not normally one to give in to the full sway of professionals as they tend to not be fans, ergo why I tend to judge the informed fan's perspective when getting a read on these things, this is more of an infamous flop there. In fact, it took until the Emoji Movie got made for something to dethrone Pyramid of Light for the worst rated anime movie on Metacritic, to say nothing of this film's Rotten Tomatoes score. I usually don't meter my experiences with movies by those, but they're kind of right in this case. Which is surprising, as structurally this movie is exactly what you'd expect from a movie about the original Yugioh era. Seto Kaba goes to extravagant lengths to challenge Yugi Moto to a card game, some individual we have never heard of before intercedes with some form of magical artifact which complicates things and pads out the story. In doing so interrupts Seto's attempt to have a fair balanced challenge he should actually win, but instead Yugi and or Tem ends up winning through the power of Deus Ex Machina, amidst which Seto loses his chance to actually obtain his goal through no fault of his own, which he legitimately would have gotten had this magic force not gotten involved in things and stolen from him something he otherwise would have legitimately earned. And yes, I used clips from Dark Side of Dimensions intentionally, as it and Pyramid of Light in a lot of ways are the same freaking movie. They are that derivative of each other. No, the big handicap to the film is the 4Kids dub of it, which scrubbed many aspects both before the movie and within it. The biggest issue being the antagonist's own magical artifact, the titular Pyramid of Light, which rubbed up against fans' dub-based beliefs that the only magical artifacts to exist within the franchise were the 7 Millennium items, which this was not one of, but the dub says it is. When, no, those weren't the only magical things in the franchise. Others had been seen earlier in the manga that was only beginning to see distribution at the time, and others would be seen after. But again, context to that was lost thanks to the 4Kids dub that said they were the only things with magic in the series. And then they had to retcon that when they got to the Doma arc. Or at least they should have, since then that exact same criticism got levied at it back in the day. Don't get me wrong, there are legitimate, long-held, agreed-upon critiques of how bad Pyramid of Light is. The soundtrack beyond one song is terrible. The motivations for the cast members make little sense. It's got bad puns, the card artwork changes are worse than usual here. Anubis going after a Tem, in the dub at least, has little logic behind it, and so on and so forth. But every single one of those criticisms are reflective of solely, and I do mean solely, the 4Kids cut of the movie, as, unsurprisingly, everything that didn't have to do with the card game within the movie's content diverged massively. Pyramid of Light, the Japanese cut, is actually a serviceable movie, despite its dub cut commonly cited as among the reasons why franchise screenwriter Shin Yoshida is terrible and should be removed by the Western fandom's reasoning, but it really is often a case of the Western fans having no understanding of how badly 4K bastardized the Japanese team's work or who actually does what on these shows. In this case, though, the original story was concocted by Masahiro Hikokubo and Junki Takagami. Yes, Super Sentai writer Junki Takagami. He wrote a lot of the screenplays for Duelist, which just again shows that the writers I discuss in my tokusatsu reviews are literally everywhere. With 4Kids' own Michael Picoriello, aka the man who was directly behind the bastardization of Ultra Antigua, and its 4Kids dub, who mainly helmed the Yugioh dubs as well, entirely writing the film from those ideas, with the Japanese team having to backwards engineer it from that to get a coherent story and have it actually conform to the true series canon, which is where Shin Yoshida even came into this. This is important context, as Pyramid of Light was commissioned by 4Kids in the height of Yu-Gi-Oh's initial popularity to bank on the franchise with theatrical money. Studio Gallo took them up on that, put in tangible effort and people on the job, And then everything they did got thrown out the window for 4Kids' own original script and airbrushed in card changes, an exclusion of over 10 minutes of content, which far better explained what the hell was going on, as 4Kids also changed around the order of events which all of these things happened, so the event continuity is all screwed up as well. In essence, the Japanese version is the coherent director's cut. Thus, to no one's surprise, when it released in August of 2004, the film bombed in regions 4Kids had control of the property, and as things had moved on to the GX era of the franchise in Japan, didn't see mainline screening there either, having a limited release in November of 2004 before being shown on TV Tokyo as a post-holiday special at the beginning of January 2005, where it was just there and everyone pretty much then ignored it. I was one of those people unfortunate enough, depending on your viewpoint, to go see it in theaters, but that's actually because I was after the special release cards. 4 promotional cards were made for the movie that you could only get by going to see it in theaters. Said cards were Watapon, which was useless, Sorcerer of Dark Magic, which, while seeming cool, was useless due to its summoning cost, Pyramid of Lights, which was required to be able to use the 3 special Sphinx monsters released in the movie exclusive packs, but all the cards from that one were also worthless. And lastly, Blue Eyes Shining Dragon. Shining Dragon was the sole card I was chasing, which should surprise no one watching, and to get it I ultimately had to trade one of my friends for it, even though no one could use that card either, as it required you to tribute a Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon to summon, and that did not release into the TCG until January of 2006. 18 months later. And by that time, we all realized his summoning cost was too high just to get immunity from targeting effects that we had from Lord of Dragons and the monster King Dragoon that had come out literal months after this movie did anyways. Thus, it was deemed virtually unplayable until Yu-Gi-Oh! Arc 5's sets released the Shaddolls, as you could build an amazing Shaddol Blue Eyes deck that made use of it until the Shaddolls got ban-listed. But at the time, this was literally, on every conceivable level, a failure, and why many fans are so bitter about this today. As in our, I want to play this stupidity, we didn't even realize how bad the cards were until after we'd been scammed into sitting through an awfully hack-jobbed film that we didn't even realize was hack-jobbed until the subs for the Japanese cut started circulating. The only lasting contribution to the series and the metagame that came from this movie was the trap card Return from the Different Dimension, released in the movie tie-in packs, and later saw advertisement in Manjome's deck during Yu-Gi-Oh! GX. It's a card that summons back banished monsters and was so useful for OTK strategies, they had to first limit it in 2008 and then perma-banned it in 2014, after banishing strategies, specifically because of the dragon rulers that laid waste to the metagame, started to become as mainstream as using the graveyard as a second toolbox. Hell, I even used it during my infamous 2006 run of conquering my local card shop that I've mentioned before, where I was constantly channeling the spirit of Seto Kaiba to win duels with the Blue Eyes deck. I used it in a 3-card combo of Future Fusion, before it was banned or errated, Dragon's Mirror for Ultimate Dragon or 5-headed Dragon, then if I needed to trigger it, Return for reinforcements. For bonus damage, Megamorph after flipping up Dragon's Rage, which I'd often set together with Return, as one acted as a bluff for the other. So either way, I'd find a way to deliver massive damage. For those who have seen the dual networking streams my friends and I do, yes, I have always been evil when it comes to Blue Eyes Dragons. Hell, that tactic only got phased out after I got my hands on copies of Honest, as I then more focused on what the Blue Eyes decks have become known for: Search, Resurrection, and Overrun. Still, while there are a lot of legitimate criticisms to this movie, some are just dumb. Most arguing over its canonicity due to the opening recapping and re-envisioning Yugi's solving of the puzzle, without the whole Jonuchi recovers the last piece part of it. Really, it's a for-the-movie condensation of the story's starting point thing you see in a lot of Japanese films that is designed to make them function as standalone and understandable stories for any viewers that may not be regular fans so they'd be able to follow along. This intercut with the discovery of the movie's antagonist because both the puzzle and the antagonist relate directly to ancient Egypt. Thus, it's a stylistic choice facilitating a condensed, coherent narrative. Which of course makes sense in the Japanese cut, but not the dub. Regardless, in this film, when Yugi solved the puzzle and released Item's spirit, as is canon, he unleashed the power of the Shadow Games and all magic in the universe that his spirit with the puzzle had sealed away. But of course, this meant a bunch of sealed evils unable to resurrect themselves due to that lock restraining their powers could now become active. Something Dark Side of Dimensions also said was a thing, and in this case, awoke Anubis, the Egyptian god of the dead, who began a search for a King of the Light. Meanwhile, back right after the Battle City tournament, the events of the battles over the God cards have played an immense impact on Duel Monsters' popularity, shooting the game's finalists into superstardom, and with everyone now becoming a player, everyone's raring to challenge the King of Games. Which is one of this movie's merits over Kazuki Takahashi's original story. A constant issue with Shonen Jump manga is they don't really address the consequences of actions within the setting. This movie, and by proxy Shin Yoshida's filler episodes and plot additions, within the anime regularly did that, and we're all gutted from the dub. But among those challengers seeking a match is Seto Kaiba, and this is one of the issues of this film. At this point in the story, Seto was supposed to be giving up dueling in order to focus on his real dream of building his theme parks, and yet is having analysts look over ways that it might be possible to overcome the power of the God cards, even if he knows that isn't possible with his current cards. While it addresses a bit of his life's philosophy and how you need to overcome your past to reach out and grasp the future as he chews them out for failing, it's made clear over time he was trying, and yet Item's illegitimate victory over him nonetheless nags at him, and as I said when addressing the Battle City finals, won't allow him to truly move on. Thus he goes to see Pegasus, who, as addressed, is alive in the anime, in search of an obscure card that he may have made as a potential counter against them, and then falling into the wrong hands of someone who could abuse them in Shadow Games. Gee, that might have been useful to have when they were dealing with Merrick. I'll give it this. The movie makes good mention of how the official card effects of the tunes, once anime transitioned to more using the real effect versions of things, showed how, well, bad the tune archetype originally was when originally released. It's only more recent cards that have done away with most of their restrictions that have allowed them to deal with the game's immense power creep to even become playable.
手札よりマジックカード発動コストダウンこのカードは説明は不要だ手札を1枚捨てて手札のモンスターレベルを2下げるカード
Then why did you then explain it? You know, we joke about people constantly explaining what Pot of Greed does, but it's player etiquette to state the effect they're using so they know what you're doing. But without Pegasus' Millennium Eye and Seto's Battle City deck upgrades, what was once a story arc final boss, in the face of even a halfway decent Seto deck, is mincemeat.
進歩のないやつデュエリストは未来を見つめて進む過去の栄光にこだわるなど愚の骨頂まさか過去を破壊し未来は創造される過去の住人から見れば未来はまさかの連続に違いないでは XYZ ドラゴンキャノンフンワールドを破壊するのだ XYZ ドラゴンキャノン Oh no!
However, when Seto takes the card by anti-rule, which could result in his counter-strategy, there's an extra card Pegasus didn't know of. Back in Domino, Yugi has to face the fallout of his fame in tons of people coming to challenge him, and there being a more understandable reason here as everyone's after the God cards and fame of beating the best player. No one respects the privacy of celebrities anymore. I blame TMZ. In endeavoring to escape from them, however, they hide in a museum which just so happens to have conveniently expanded their Egyptian exhibit to include the artifacts of Anubis, including the Pyramid of Light, said in this version of things to be wielded by the King of Light, the exact opposite and made to counter the power of the King of Darkness, which, when the two clash, will bring forth the resurrection of the King of Destruction. Ergo, defining the threat on consequences of a clash and the villain's manipulations, in understandable terms. Though it may have been better to not sugarcoat things. Regardless, after Yugi sees a flash of something from the artifact, he's contacted by Mokuba about Seto having started acting weird since mating with Pegasus, which was another thing lost in the dub. That Seto wasn't himself anymore during this. Though with how aloof, reserved, and snarky he can be, how could you tell? And that this is causing him to use the gods in a regular duel which he didn't want to ever do due to their power. Whereas the dub made this seem as this is a thing he would regularly make use of. Still, instead of extreme stakes, Seto makes clear from this that he just wants to see if he's surpassed the limitations of the gods. Whereas Atem's the one making this all about out-of-place dark forces that really, from Seto's perspective, makes sense. There's no Millennium items, no Dark Mastermind, no high-stakes tournament, and no anti-rule. This is just a stakeless game between respectful rivals. He's not bringing anything more than that into this. Why bring in that occultic crap as an excuse to avoid a duel when the conditions for that are nowhere to be seen? It's easy to see why he doesn't perceive himself being manipulated, as his goal, and the villain that's secretly inciting him into this, are in alignment in this goal of getting Ra, Osiris, and Obelisk, gods of the living world, out of the way, in order to resurrect the god of the dead, Anubis. And hey, Anubis is a bad guy? That's not exactly a bad idea. Every Millennium item is marked with the Eye of Anubis on them, bar the puzzle that has the full Eye of Wajat, and that eye manifests on the foreheads of those either using or affected by shadow magic originating from those items. Hell, they're on the 7-star Assassins items in GX and on monsters all throughout the franchise. Hell, in narrative, there's a basis for why he would be an antagonist. As I've mentioned before, the pharaohs of Egypt took on the role of Osiris in life to rule over Egypt, but as their lore moved on, over time Osiris also usurped the role of Anubis himself, as eventually becoming the one who ruled over death and the underworld himself, despite Anubis in mythology originally being the one who was the ruler of the underworld, thus taking revenge on an incarnation of one claiming to take the place of Osiris, and through him assert his own power on what was originally solely Osiris' domain in the same way his own kingdom was taken over. Coupled with the fact that Atem is someone who, by his spirit being sealed in the puzzle instead of going on to the afterlife, has escaped Anubis' dominion as well, from the antagonist's perspective, that makes an insane amount of sense. Guess what the dub did not give any lip service to? Hell, the Japanese version of this makes even more retroactive sense once Yugioh GX got to the Light of Ruin storyline, as Anubis later speaks of spreading the reach of his powers and destroying the world with the power of his light once released from the shadow of death. It foreshadows all of that. Unfortunately, even in the original cut, not much time is spent with that either. Instead, amidst the duel leading to Anubis' resurrection, Yugi and friends are instead sucked into the manifested powers of the Pyramid of Light, and sent into the puzzle, with the intent meant through the abuse of the shadow magic to destroy the pyramid from within. Now, as much as people hate on this movie, one of the things you have to give it is it actually allows Yugi to freaking do something. Atem is the one who supersedes him most of the time, and when looking back on the franchise the entire way along it, it's mostly Atem that's in the driver's seat, invalidating the role of the main character as the possessor drowns out the existence of the possessee, and it's like that in all media that utilizes this dynamic. It is again why the possession plot device is so difficult to use properly, as it is very rarely, oh no, they're right there with them supporting them, even in the symbiosis take, and why such is normally seen as inherently horrific and analogous to rape. But this movie avoids that by giving him and his friends this "we're going to be the ones to solve the real problem" subplot, while Atem keeps Seto and then later Anubis' attention. They're the ones dealing with the true threat as it seeks to emerge from the depths of shadows which had sealed it away, and back into the light whose path had been opened by this artifact, and escape the protections against that exact thing from happening, which the shadow game is facilitating by draining powerful players' life in tributes. In the terms of the original script, this is just another shadow game, with just conditions neither new, and more players involved. But of course, Atem started making up card effects when he summoned Sorcerer of Dark Magic, with an attack reduction effect which actually would have made the real card worth playing for its summoning cost. And they made the card before they made the movie this time around, so no excuse for it. Still less insulting than what happened with Flute of Summoning Dragon in Battle City, but pretty much of the same class of bullcrap. But that just leads to the chase card of the movie's debut, Blue Eyes Shining Dragon, and its absolute effect targeting negation ability. And at least the changed sorcerer effect gave it an excuse to display that power, thus the bullcrap Deus Ex Machina is less egregious here than it was in the Battle City arc, more explicable and better written for tension, and it sets off Anubis' resurrection. Had that not happened, however, this would have been the point where Seto would have had yet another legitimate win against Atem under his belt. Pegasus shows up, explaining Blue Eye's Shining Dragon was that card intended to counter the power of the gods with its effect negation ability, and the Pyramid of Light the card planted set off the Shadow Game, leading to Anzu diving into the pyramid and doing an exposition drop that, yeah, even with the Japanese cut of this film, makes no goddamn sense and is exceedingly obnoxious. As she doesn't actually do anything that anyone else in the story couldn't have done, and they learned in any other form, since Anubis just reveals himself right after this when he finally manifests because of Atem. As I've always said, Atem's big character flaw is his pride. By surrendering to Seto right here, right now, as Anzu said they should, the entire following situation and the Shadow Game itself would end before Anubis could drain enough of their life to revive himself. But he doesn't, because his own pride won't let him. Instead, he insists trying to make Seto be the one to do it when he has no presented reason to, and everyone believes him to be possessed by Anubis anyways, and what they want him to do, destroy the Pyramid of Light, was part of his strategy anyways. But Anubis steps in, prevents that from happening, and summons his own monsters in order to take the power of Atem to become the King of Destruction, only for Yugi to solve the puzzle of Anubis' powers, break the gemstone consolidating all the life he's taken so his power weakens, while at the same time Atem uses a bullshit card combo to resurrect Blue Eye's Shining Dragon so it can trigger Pyramid of Light's destruction for a second time, and essentially doing the same thing Seto was to win.
At least someone won with Blue Eyes this weekend, right, Kappa?
This is where things just go straight out the window story-wise any way you look at it, since with the Shadow Game disabled, Anubis should vanish, and yet it takes ending the game with Seto's return for the different dimension card to return the influence of the gods for things to finally end.
神の怒りを思い知れ究極の鉄槌インフィニティゴッドインパクト
Except even that doesn't put Anubis down, manifesting as the Iker from the Fate series Holy Grail? The hell? Yeah, even the Japanese cut can't make sense out of this. But just as is seen throughout the show, when he could have just done it himself, Seto gives the key to victory to Yugi to end things like this.
Yugioh! Blue Eyes Shining Dragon! Shining Nova!
Face your own light of destruction, bitch. Game over.
闇の力、そんなものは信じない。俺は俺自身の力で貴様を超えてみせる。
Because at the end of the day, the status quo is God. Pyramid of Light is not a good movie, though it's about what you'd expect from a Yugioh film, to the point Dark Side of Dimensions would play out pretty much the same effective sequence of events over a decade later, but at least the Japanese cut is a hell of a lot better than the Western one, as it actually explains what the hell is going on. Admittedly, some of that I've clearly read into with regards to Anubis' motivations, but let's face it, the number of overtly complex villains in this franchise are surprisingly lacking. So the Japanese cut giving him anything is a lot more than just one step up. The Pyramid's existence isn't a problem with regards to the true series canon. It plays off of legitimate mythology for its originating lore. The anime effects of the cards make them actually seem like things which would have made them chase card worthy that Konami simply failed to follow up on. Honestly, this is overall a much better time. Hell, I both enjoy and hate the dub movie soundtrack. Really, the only song from it that was good was You're Not Me, which I even used when I reviewed Persona 4, as it fit perfectly a lot of stuff with that game's themology. But it works so much more with the original anime's music. Really, that's the tragedy of so many bad, make-it-for-kids dubs that don't seem to understand this. The original music could so compensate for many of your other changes. I don't think all dub music is bad, mind you, but the wrong score or too generic a score loses the essence of the tone of the material and character the other liberties and localizations entirely scrub away. And this movie thus can serve as a microcosm of 4Kids' many fuck-ups. Something interesting and potentially exciting in its niche turned into other garbage everyone hates. Overall, for some, the Japanese cut of Pyramid of Light might be worth a rewatch of the film. It's still a bad movie, but there's more good to it. But with this over with, we can finally get around to discussing the Season 4 content, and how a lot of it is overhated. So prepare to play your Steel Voracalcos, people! It's time for the Doma arc.